What makes you a dungeon master? When I grew up, I played D&D with my brother and another pair of brothers. I was the youngest of the four of us. I was never the DM. I did not understand the game enough to be DM, so that made sense. But they also never wanted me to be the DM. When I started playing again within the last 5 years, I became the DM because I wanted to play more and I wanted to find people to play with. So we're going to explore this idea of why are you the DM? And maybe ultimately get round to the question for people who have been wondering, well, why aren't you the DM? Because a lot of times, at first, when you're first presented with that possibility, it almost feels a little much. It feels like, whoa, I don't know if I can do that. And I'm pretty sure, hopefully, through us sharing our own experiences, people might get the idea that, yeah, I guess I could try that. I could do that. So, first question I wanted to ask was, what characteristics or personality traits make you, not someone else, but make you a good dungeon master? So
I'll jump on it. I'll jump on it. In all honesty, like a lot of my background really is what kind of drove everything. Getting into TTRPGs, it was actually finding. So my brother was an artist. He went the whole college route with art and all that. But he had TTRPG books laying around, and I would grab them and look through them as a young kid, like 8 years old, trying to figure out like, what am I looking at? I had no idea about like, skills and like ability scores and all this other stuff. Like I was just legit looking at the characters. So I would take those characters and I would put them together with just like the physical side of it and not necessarily like the stat side or the game side of it. And I kind of went through life just doing that, just putting characters together. That's just where my passion lives. Getting into high school and stuff, I got involved with theater and that whole life, and it just led into just having the whole concept of just storytelling, and that was just my passion. Like I really love to bring stories into people's lives and find unique and interesting ways to tell them. A little bit other background that kind of like plays into that is the fact that I grew up as a puppeteer. I was very, very involved with puppeteering, whether it was just like marionette or like human arm puppet or whatever the case was. Jim Henson was my hero. Like that was like he was my homeboy. If I ever would have had the chance to meet him,
Yeah.
R.I.P.
Right. And taking that aspect of my life where it was just all about creating characters and then growing up with a father that was a professional clown, everything just kind of melded together. Right. Yeah. And it was really funny because like going through high school, it's like, yeah, my dad was the clown at your 8th birthday party. You didn't know that. But so it's always just been like a people person kind of thing and just wanting to bring people together and tell them a good story. So like that's really what led me into it. So several years back, I was like, okay, let's give the D&D thing a try. Let's actually like dive into it. So I got the books, started reading into it, and found a group of players that were very understanding with having a new DM, start into it. So I played with a group of guys, started running through a Mines of Phandelver game. About halfway through it, got completely bored with the book, threw it out, and by the end of that campaign, a year and a half later, like they're fighting dragons. It was just like this is where it's at. We're having fun. Everybody seemed to enjoy it until I TPK'd them, and
you got it.
Like, it was an accident on my part. I was not paying attention, and yeah, that's a long story for another day. But yeah, it was mostly just the whole storytelling aspect. Like I love getting involved with people. I love just getting creative, seeing things from other people's perspectives. It's really that character creation. Just because if you look at my D&D Beyond account, like I make character sheets for my NPCs. It's just like I get that thorough with it. So some of them, they're not necessarily filled into a class or anything like that, and I'll push them off to the side and do them outside of like D&D Beyond or whatever. But I make sure that like my characters have purpose.
Right.
Me and my brother kind of have a running joke now that we both kind of went head first into D&D. We min max for flavor. You know, so like that's where we live. You know, it's just like trying to figure out these unique ways of building characters or just building personalities in a game and stuff like that. So honestly, why am I a DM? Because I like playing with with people. I like telling stories. I just like having fun.
So I kind of heard two main ideas there in what you said, Sam. But and I'm curious what other people are going to say. I'm curious if we're going to be able to pull together almost like a bullet list of here are some similar feelings that we all seem to have. So does anyone else want to address that question? What characteristics, what personalities make you a good dungeon master?
My thing is I love building a world and then living in it. I don't think I've been DMing for, I'm old, so I got to do math, 35, 36 years, something like that. The first time I ever played was a D&D box set. My father, great joy in taking my sister and I through the old basic game and killing us almost instantly. Our first game just lasted like 10 minutes. Right. And edition was the first edition. AD&D is what I first DM'd in. Like a bunch of other people, I was in the theater. I took acting classes from the third grade on, community theater, everything like that. So it gets that creative kind of bug out of me. But I have always run my own worlds. I love building worlds, putting them together, and then letting people loose in them and letting them breathe. Because other people's interactions adds to that world. They ask questions I never think to answer. They take me down roads I didn't know I would go. And at the kernel of it, there's a story that gets told, but instead of an individual story, I'm letting history go forth. It's like, how does the history of this world that I've built contribute to what is going on now, and how does that history change going forward? And I also ask, if I'm sitting and doing one thing at a time, I can't. I will paint miniatures while watching TV and playing a game on my phone at the same time. This is how I live. And just sitting there quietly waiting for my turn as a player, I love playing. I will play in any campaign anybody wants me to at any point, not a problem. But juggling 3 NPCs and 8 people in a fight while DMing 7 people, this is my Monday. This is what I do, and is what appeals to me, is making this world, making these stories, letting other people try and break it, and where it goes with it.
Nice. Thanks, Chris. What you were talking about, always feeling the need to do more than one thing at once. And I mean, that's what dungeon mastering is. You are you're connecting to what has happened. You're dealing with what is happening while thinking about what needs to happen yet. And
why do you think we have a screen we hide behind?
Right.
And just thinking, like, playing online. Last night I was playing in my Curse of Strahd campaign. I'm not exaggerating when I say I'm pretty sure I had about 23 tabs open, 25, across 2 monitors. And I've often thought, I think I might need a third monitor. And it reminds me of I think it's the author Terry Pratchett. He had 6 monitors that he would write at. He had a bank of 6 monitors, and someone asked him, "Why do you have 6 monitors?" And he said, "Because I don't have room for 8." And I was like, "Yeah, I could kind of see the need for that as things keep going." Yeah. Anyone else? What makes you a good DM, Derek?
Yeah. So characteristics that I can think of. As a kid, I always had a crazy imagination. I would tell my parents crazy stories I make up on my own. As I kind of was in my tween to teen years, I loved reading the newspaper and picking out all the stats from the sports page and like calculating all of these averages. And so I loved the imagination piece. I loved the numbers piece, and being able to like tell stories, but then use stats and use random luck to weave something together is like a perfect combination of both of those things. So yeah, I think my imagination plays a lot into it, and then just my need to track numbers and control everything. I'm kind of a control freak. Not in my, I don't know, like in my real life, I feel like I'm pretty laid back, but when it comes to DMing, like meticulous, I have stuff for everything. I have ideas for everything. I wanna like know everything that's going on and like know what's happening behind the screen. When I'm a player, it's kind of hard for me because I only see what the DM lets me see, and I only know what my player knows, and it's kind of like I want more. So I can play, like I was saying, I can play and I can let go, and it's usually okay. But I love being the one calling the shots. Obviously, your players make decisions, but I just love being the one that has to decide what happens next. So.
Mm-hmm. So I'm actually, I feel like I'm a little bit similar to you, Derek, mainly with how I was as a kid, because I remember growing up and like I'd come up with these wild stories that like there was like the most random things, and I tell my parents and I'm like, okay, kiddo, right on. But so like I think I've always had that kind of storytelling personality, and like I hadn't ever really found a good medium for that until I discovered D&D and like actually understood what the game could be. Because like I even now I still want to write a book. Like I want to be able to do stuff like that. But that's like I get to make the story, but like it doesn't feel like I really get to share that with anyone, and that sucks. So like when I discovered D&D, I was invited in high school back in I think like 2012 or 2013, and some friends of mine invited me over. I'm like, I have no idea what this is. I've never heard of this. You're all smoking weed. What are we doing? And my friends were really nice about it, and I'm like, so what's the point? And they're like, nothing. Dan's just gonna throw some stuff at us, and you can do whatever you want. I'm like, that's crazy. That's not possible. And it wasn't until college that I got invited to another group and realized in a similar manner to you, Derek, of like, I was a player at a table. And when things started to click about like what the potential of a well-run D&D game is, and then I was like, I don't want to be the player anymore. This sucks. I hate this. And like, I feel like it was partially me being a little narcissistic of like, I could do better. But I immediately like just.
But I could do better.
I could do better. I think I am doing better. Like, I think anyone who actually like takes the plunge of anyone who takes that plunge of like, I'm just gonna try it. I think they were mainly DMing because it was like we had a group of people who all wanted to play, and no one's gonna volunteer as the DM, right?
Yeah.
But what I learned, because it was shortly after that I had my first campaign. Same as you, Sam. I started with Lost Mines of Phandelver, and I was like, this sucks.
Isn't it
I hate
awful?
This. It's the worst module. I personally hate modules. I hate modules.
I ran that and stopped using them. I don't think I've touched another one.
Well, what I learned from it, because that was the first time I really jumped into DMing. I didn't really have anyone kind of helping me with it, and I brought in a bunch of my friends who I was like, you guys are going to do this with me. They had never played, right. So I'm kind of just on my own with that. So I was just like, I got to learn from my own experience, like at a certain point of like, oh, you know what? I don't have to follow the book. Oh, my players are doing stuff that's like totally not written in this book. What do? I guess I get to do whatever I want, I guess. And then it spirals from there. And there was also like just a huge element of learning about like being willing to lose that control in the game as well. I think I've met a lot of people who are DMs who've asked me for advice. And first thing I tell them now is like, you are going to want to feel like you're controlling everything. You can do all the prep and everything, but when you get into the chair, just expect your players to just do whatever they want. Yeah. And I love that. I think that's really fun. And one of the main skills that I've learned from that is just the ability to improvise. As long as I know the general direction that I want to take the players, then we're going to get there, regardless if my players start doing crazy random stuff. The 2 campaigns I'm running now could not be more crazy than they are, and I just keep adapting to it. But to answer the main question, I think one of the biggest things for me that's helped me as a DM, my background is in engineering. For a couple of years, I worked as a systems engineer, which is a lot of like overview, big picture kind of work. You're kind of the bad guys in most of the circumstances, telling other people like, this is how we're supposed to do this, guys. But what it taught me was like to look at a massive picture first before focusing in. So focusing in on specific elements of something and how do we get there then, right? And that started translating to D&D a lot more because I like running long-term campaigns. And so I focus in on very specific events that I want to have happen eventually. I don't carve out how we get there. I get like general ideas, but I carve out where are we going. I like focus all the way up to like level 20. Where is the end game? Where am I taking them? And that helps me, like, I have a goal in mind the whole time. And I feel like that has been really beneficial in my becoming a DM.
That was great. And you touched on a lot of really important points. So many things that I want to kind of...
I'm sorry.
No. That, you know, that were common between the things that you guys said. So here are the 7 words that I wrote down. Story.
Pick number 3.
And number 1, story. Storytelling. And it's funny looking at these 7 words and being like, yeah, this is me. So it's interesting how between the 4 of you, you kind of all said things that for me, I'd say, this is me in a nutshell right here.
Right.
Storytelling, community building, being creative and creating things. Multitasking, right? Having your brain just constantly firing, trying to deal with multiple things. Information weaving is how I put that.
Okay.
I always loved lists as a kid. And then having that control, that's a big part. And last of all, David, you talked about improv. And I think those 7 things kind of sum up the job of the Dungeon Master really well. Storytelling, community building, being creative, multitasking, weaving all bits of information together, control and improv. And it's interesting, those last 2 almost seem like they are opposites, control and improv. I know that as a teacher, that became such an important concept throughout your day. That how do I create a structure that allows my students to try different things without me clamping down and saying, nope, that's not going to happen, etc. And so kind of brings me to the next question. Are there, and some of you have already touched on that a little bit, are there aspects of other parts of your life, whether that's your job or a hobby, etc., that make their way very easily into the world of being a dungeon master?
Yeah, I think part of our history and our backgrounds was going to contribute to everything, whether we wanted to or not. I've got 20 years of retail management, so I know how to herd a bunch of cats and point them all in the same direction. And players in a campaign can be considered that. Okay, I really don't want you to go up this mountain. You're going up the mountain. Okay, well, here's an avalanche cutting off the pass in the mountain. You're tunneling through the avalanche. Here's 2 frost giant skeletons that will definitely kill you. Oh, you've turned around. Good. It's a little bit of that improv, and the acting that I did all growing up and in college and community theater after that goes into all the NPCs and the organizational skills that I've learned in both college and studying and life and business, all goes together towards organizing a campaign. I've got spreadsheets, I've got histories, I've got all the stuff that it all applies. Your skills are your skills, no matter what you're doing.
Sure. Anyone
Well,
else?
I mean, yeah, if pretty much what he was saying, if you take your history and just let it come out in your games, that's where most of your games become the most fun. I had a group going through a town, and in all honesty, every NPC that they ran into in that town were teachers from my high school. Just some of like my favorite teachers from that high school. They had to meet an artificer. That was the computer teacher that I grew up with. It was just like, come on, like you just got to play that out and let it roll. And then on top of that, it's just, there's a lot of misconceptions about clowns. They're not just there to make you laugh. They're more about how to relate to you, to bring out joy, and I think utilizing some of the skills that my dad taught me, and just seeing him work and seeing how well he could relate to people. I think a lot of that really helped me. It really kind of made me dive into playing more with new players. In all honesty, I think most of my campaigns, they're starting off with 4 to 6 players that have never touched the game before, and figuring out a way to help build them together, and utilizing a lot of just those people skills that my dad taught me. Just kind of melding that community together and going from there. But yeah, just common task growing up, like you were saying, the spreadsheets and all that. Like we all have, files upon files of stuff for our games. Let's get real.
Speaking of just life experiences in general, I have 4 younger siblings. I'm the oldest of 5. So that kind of, I mean, I don't want to say like I am a leader, but I had to lead and I had to control, and I was the default babysitter. And so, to the herding cats point, that was also part of my experience growing up. And yeah, my job is finding meaning where others don't see it. It's pouring through rows and columns of numbers and information, and trying to figure out what how to make sense of it and what to use it for. And I feel like that's a lot of what DMing is as well. It's looking at a blank slate and imagining stuff that could be there, and then filling it out and fleshing it out with your ideas. So yeah, I feel like my skills of analysis and skills of leadership and that kind of thing really shaped who I became behind the screen as well.
Yeah, I touched on it a little bit for me, of like my background with engineering helped me to learn how to structure something like this. Because when I was first learning how the world build, like I feel like I did it horribly. But when I took this like systems engineering approach from it, top down, focused in on specific areas, and made those like key events, like that really started to help me. And to what Derek said too, like I don't have 4 younger siblings. Props to you, but I've taken lots of leadership positions in my life. I've jumped on a lot of opportunities where I could, and that has helped me with being able to bring a group together, multiple groups together, to actually create something that wouldn't have existed before. Because it's a communal storytelling is first off, it can be pretty difficult to get everyone in that space. It's also kind of vulnerable for everyone to jump into that. So I feel like I have learned like leadership really does help with that if you have that, but just being able to sympathize with them, and it's good to be a player every now and then and remind yourself of like, oh, hey, it really does suck when a 27 hits and you take 32 damage and you immediately go unconscious. That does suck, and that doesn't feel very good sometimes. So like to have like empathy with them and remember that like you are just leading them through this, through a story just for you and your group or your listeners if you do podcasts like a bunch of us.
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about all those obstacles that you face kind of getting into DMing. I know for myself, growing up in that situation of being the never DM and having to play for about a year before I started thinking, I think I could try this. And I had a very forgiving audience for my first few sessions. It was my kids. And so they know the rules. Like, they've read the books, and they still are like, oh, Dad, you need to remember to do this and that kind of stuff. I forget that stuff all the time. But what it allowed me to do is go through those stages of kind of trying things out. And I think, unlike the rest of you, I'm getting a sense I'm more of a pre-written campaign guy. I enjoy the having the structure that I can improvise from, to go back to an earlier point. Having that there and then seeing what I can do with it. And part of that is probably because I think I run 4 games right now, and honestly, I can't get my head around making stuff up.
Yeah,
so,
you know what? That does make sense.
Yeah. So 4 pre-written campaigns is doable. It's a little bit tough right now. I kind of thought 1 or 2 would be done by now, but they're not.
Well, I mean, DMing is like shoes. You got to think about it this way. Like, nobody's going to wear the same kind of shoes that you do. So, I mean, you know, like, hey, if that's what works for you and you can make games fun with it, I'm not going to say a dang word. Like, just go at it, run with it, have fun. It's just like people bringing homebrew in, you know? I mean, if you want to bring all the homebrew and just make everything 100% yours, it's all on you, buddy.
Totally. You know, I would love to be able to do that, but I just don't have the time. What would you say were the biggest obstacles that you faced? And how did you overcome those obstacles?
I can win this question. You ready?
To win it? Is it competition? Oh no,
it is now. The biggest obstacle that I had to overcome, like starting to DM, was never having played a game of D&D in my life.
Okay,
that's pretty solid. That's pretty rough.
Yeah, that's pretty good. We'll see what other people say though.
I started DMing before I ever played a game, and I mean that's just kind of where I fell into it. I mean. I had watched games, I had overheard and listened in and things like that, but I had never actually played in a game of D&D before I started DMing.
And how did it go?
I felt like it went great. That first group that I had were somewhat seasoned players. They kind of, you know, they knew the game well, and they were able to kind of like nudge me around back just a little bit to kind of keep me online, but understanding like I had spent a lot of time reading the books, making sure that I was familiar with things and just, you know, ready to go into it. But I was able to kind of keep my pride aside and like take the hits if I messed up, which there were several times that I did. And I think in all honesty, like you were kind of asking, like, what's that biggest hurdle? Fear, like fear of just playing the game. Like at that point you're another player, you just got a little bit more responsibility. Like
well, I think I think there was someone else that and forgive me, I kind of forget which one of you was talking about it, but there is that feeling of that you as a DM you feel responsible for the other people having fun. Not saying that that's true, but I think there is that feeling that you get. I know when I had a group, I had a cousin who was like, "Yeah, I want to try D&D. Let's try it. I'll join the group." And he was super into it for like a month and a half, 2 months. And then I noticed that when it came time for game time, he was not responding and not showing up, that kind of thing. And then just said, "Yeah, I lost interest." And you can't help but think, okay, so what did I do wrong? And I think a big part of it is it's not only you. You're only one variable in amidst a whole bunch of variables. And I think for me, the obstacle is, what if people aren't having fun? And that's why those, you know, day after texts that you get that, oh man, last night was such a blast.
Oh, those are big.
Okay,
those,
thank goodness. Yeah. Thank goodness.
Those are big texts.
Yeah.
We don't live for the pat on the back, but boy, does it feel great.
Do you know how much work I put into this? Thank you so much for this one text message. You told me 3 words. It was fun. That's great.
Yeah. Everyone out there, I'm not saying if you thank your DM, you'll be disintegrated by fewer beholders, but
send that text. It means a lot.
Yeah, it makes a big difference.
Those real moments that make you feel good is like when your players send you gifts. That's like,
that's pretty
the Dungeon Master
nice.
Anyone else? What obstacles do you feel that you faced when you started, and how did you overcome them?
Well, when I started, I was, like I was saying, I was like 12, 13 years old, and it's a mindset that I've seen occasionally since then, and it's probably the worst thing in the world is slip into that mindset of it's you versus them. And it's, okay, what incredibly hideous diabolical trap that I can make that will utterly kill them all without any... No. That's at the end of the day, that's not fun for anyone. You know, have you can do clever things, you can do fiendish things, but when you're keeping score against your players, it's crossed the line.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that is such an important point. It is not a me versus you. We are doing this together. In one group I had a player who forgot to tell me some key information about his character. And then as it came up, it was a new group and I'd forgotten that bit about their character's, his character's race. And then afterwards, like, oh, I totally forgot that you had this and this penalty. He's like, yeah, I was waiting to see if you'd notice. I'm like, but that's not how this game works. Like, you would have said, hey, no, that shouldn't work because, my character. Like, I can understand if you just forgot just like I did. But if you're withholding that information, that's not how this game works.
Player.
Yeah.
That's on the player. That's not on
so that guy lost one session. So
I mean it definitely took some time to actually realize the important things when DMing, and that what needs to be stated early on, like what you were saying, Chris, I am not here to try and kill the characters that you guys love. I tell all the time. I want them all dead. No. Like I ask my players now before campaigns, like, are you guys okay with the possibility of losing these characters? And I make sure that they know that my goal is not to cause that. It's not me. I'm not in the game. I'm not the dragon. The dragon's just there. I'm not trying to kill your characters. There are some times that circumstances really go bad. I guess what I had to learn was, how do you set up a campaign? How do you start off with those kinds of, like, listing off, not necessarily boundaries, but just like, are we all cool with this? Are we all on the same page?
I mean, that's session 0 101. Yeah,
but I don't think
we can do another episode on session 0.
And we have planned an episode on session 0, so that would be a good one to have you back for.
But when you're first starting a campaign, the book doesn't really tell you, like, you should have a session 0 first, right? It tells you make the characters and let's jump in, and that's what I did. And it wasn't like we had a bad time, but there's definitely parts in first campaigns that I ran where I was like, I wish I had said something. I wish we were on the same page beforehand, because there was definitely some miscommunications on some things where people assumed that I was kind of the bad guy in it, and that's not what I was trying to do. I mean, sometimes it's the player makes a bad decision. The dice just tell the story.
Greg Colt just put something interesting, which has to do with what we're chatting right now. He says, we never had session 0 as a kid. It wasn't really needed because we were all friends. I can see it's needed playing with strangers. And I know in the groups that I play in, the groups that, are with friends that I've known for 25, 30 years, some of those did not have a session 0. Some of them did. The groups with strangers absolutely did, because you want to make sure as a DM you're not crossing the line. Expectations are the same for, how this is all going to play out, etc. But like I said, that is a topic for a whole other episode.
Yeah.
So the people talking about that will just have to come back. Thanks everyone for watching. Thanks you guys for being here for this. All right.
Absolutely.
Thanks everybody.
Cue the music.